After months of heightened rhetoric, both Russia and the United States are focusing on dialogue and diplomacy. After the United States responded to Russia's security demands, Moscow said that it was clear that the US was not willing to address the main security concerns in their standoff over Ukraine. Our next report gets you apprised with all the developments.
One day after the U.S. hand-delivered a response to Russia regarding its security concerns, Moscow on Thursday said it was clear the U.S. was not willing to address the most critical among them. As delicate negotiations continue, Russia remains steadfast in its demand that post-Cold War security arrangements in Europe be redrawn. Specifically, Russia is insisting that NATO halt any further enlargement, bar Ukraine from ever joining the alliance, and pull back forces and weaponry from Eastern European countries that entered NATO after the Cold War. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov doubled down on Moscow's position Thursday.
As for
the main question, there is no positive reaction to it in the document. The main question is our clear message that we consider further NATO expansion to the east and weapons deployment, which can threaten the Russian Federation, unacceptable.
But a day earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, while not disclosing the specifics of the U.S. response, made it clear that blocking the expansion of NATO was a non-starter.
NATO's door is open, remains open, and that is our commitment.
Meanwhile, Russia has continued military drills near its border with Ukraine, where it has massed some 100,000 troops, provoking Western fears of an invasion. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Thursday said Moscow needed time to review the U.S. document, as well as one submitted by NATO, and would not rush to conclusions, but that the responses to Russia's key demands did not leave much room for optimism. The U.S. on Thursday called on China to use its influence with Russia to urge a diplomatic solution to the crisis, but policy experts doubted Beijing would back Washington in the standoff.
For the latest on the conflict brewing between the West and Russia on Ukraine, we are now joined by Stuart Smith from Moscow. Stuart, welcome to WION World is One. Now, after the U.S. responded to Russia's security demands, Moscow said that it was clear that the U.S. was not willing to address the main security concerns in their standoff over Ukraine. Is there any scope of tensions coming down despite weeks of diplomacy?
Well, we just heard from Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov here in Russia. He's doing a round of interviews on radio stations after these responses from the US and NATO. He said if it's up to Russia, there will be no war, but it's up, but that there will be, but we will not allow our interests to be ignored. This is live coming in right now in Russia as the foreign minister does a round of radio interviews. So Russia not saying it's the end of diplomacy, but that it's not going to sit around either waiting, leaving it as things are. Now, the United States and NATO are also not just leaving it here. It is expected that the Russian Foreign Minister and the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken will meet to discuss these proposals at least one more time. In the meantime, the Western NATO military alliance is moving troops east, and more are being put on standby because what the Western leaders are considering now is Russia said it was not willing to let this issue go, but at the same time has now been rebuffed. It's ruling out an invasion of Ukraine. It's ruling out attacking any other countries. So what will Russia do next with so few options available to it? Well, the United States is warning, and Ukraine is worried that it will use other measures such as cyber attacks, using energy manipulation, or trying to destabilize Ukraine in other ways to try to get its demands secured.
About Ukraine, the country that is largely left out of crucial talks. There are also disagreements between the United States and Ukraine over the risk level of a Russian attack as of now in conversations between President Biden and the Ukrainian president. How is all this going to pan out?
Yes, that's right. So there are still negotiations going on between Ukraine, Russia, Germany and France in the Normandy format, which might sound like a very positive step. Plans talked due to take place in Berlin in 2 weeks' time. But this format only deals with the situation in eastern Ukraine. And although incredibly important in this context, this is not related to, for example, NATO military deployments, whether Ukraine can join the NATO military alliance, whether nuclear weapons from the US can be placed on European soil. Those are the main concerns concerns that Russia was worried about. And so diplomatic efforts focusing on resolving the conflict in Ukraine's east are a separate issue. Now, indeed, talking about why or when an invasion could happen, we should stress Russia denies it ever would. But if it could happen, the US and Ukraine are slightly differing on this. Ukraine is less convinced that an invasion is imminent, saying that there are not enough troops yet surrounding Ukraine for Russia to invade. There are not the right facilities, such as medical personnel or medical equipment, to launch a full-scale invasion. And Ukraine is also saying that that may not be the true intention of Russia. But the United States isn't taking any chances by putting NATO troops on high readiness and also asking its diplomats, some of whom, to evacuate the embassy in Kiev.
Right, Stuart, thanks so much for all those inputs and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.